The Standard Deviations podcast is a weekly production that looks at money, mind, and meaning, all through a psychological lens. Each week, psychologist and New York Times bestselling author Dr. Daniel Crosby interviews a fascinating new guest, experts in everything from finance to literature to wellness.
When was the last time you splurged on something when you knew it probably conflicted with one of your financial goals, like paying down debt or saving for future fun in retirement? Well, if you do this, you're not alone. It's because of present bias, or to use the psychobabble term, hyperbolic discounting. As humans, we have a tendency to let the immediate rewards of the here and now win out over a desired future reality. To learn more, check out the Cash Stash Dash, a planning tool brought to you by the Guardian Network to see just how much your short-term spends might be impacting your longer-term financial goals. Play today by visiting www.livingconfidently.com/play.
Hello and welcome to Standard Deviations. I'm your host, as always, Dr. Daniel Crosby. I am joined today in the studio, by which I mean my basement, by Kyle Van Pelt, who is formally a solutions manager at SS&C Advent, but informally, he's one of my favorite guys and one of the best thinkers around on financial technology and the future of our little industry. Welcome to the show, Kyle.
Thanks for having me, Doc.
Yeah, thank you for coming down here and not stepping on all the Legos to get to my auspicious recording studio.
I was glad that I didn't step on any Legos, but I think it put me in a good mind place to do this interview.
Okay. So I like to start off every show by asking folks, just like, what's something about you that doesn't appear on the CV? What should people know about you to get to know you at your core a little bit better?
Yeah. So it's somewhat on the CV, but a story I love to tell people is my wife and I started a coffee shop a little while ago, and we kind of did it backwards. A lot of people I talk to want to start a coffee shop maybe when they retire or later in life. And we tried to do it early on before we had kids. And it was a really fun experience and we had a great time, but it ended up financially ruining us. So my wife got pregnant with our first child while we were there. We were both working 16, 18-hour days. And we ended up having to roll out of it. And it was a pretty huge financial loss. So, we, embarrassingly enough, ended up having to move into my in-laws' basement. I had negative $16 in my bank account and we owed a bunch of people money. And I remember that being rock bottom. And, so when I think a lot about our industry, or we see people talking about personal finance and everything, and I see a lot of the work that Tyrone Ross is doing or other people are doing, I feel that. I remember going to the grocery store and having to use a calculator, right? And like putting groceries in the cart and going, we can't afford that, and putting it back. And going from there, our rock bottom moment, having now a wonderful family and just being blessed to be in the situation I'm in. That's the story behind seeing, owners of Cutie Pie's Coffee on my CV. But it's something that I wouldn't trade for anything.
Yeah. So to that point, I think we live in a day and age where failure is sort of glamorized. People talk about failing forward and people talk about, the power of failing. Was it a powerful moment for you? And what it seems like the kind of thing that could either make you or break you. And how did you lead it to make you instead of to break you?
Yeah. So this is an interesting topic of discussion. We're going right off the bat with deep stuff. But I am very conscious of the fact that we had a safety net, and no, it wasn't super rich parents or anything like that. But if I didn't have in-laws who lived in the same city that allowed us to live in their basement, we would have been homeless. And, that probably does change the calculus of whether or not we would have made the decision to do it. But when you see a lot of Silicon Valley people talking about failing, the worst case scenario is they go get a job at a big tech company, right? And so you fail your way into a really large 6-figure position, like, terrible. So yeah, you can go fail in those scenarios and learn. Do I think that it made us? It certainly helped me learn grit and work ethic. Putting in 16, 18-hour days is not easy. And failing after all of that was psychologically devastating and it was rock bottom. But I will say this, after all of that, I was able to get a job and I was able to start climbing our way out of it. And I tell a lot of people now, when I look at things that might have risk or something along those lines, I saw the worst case scenario and it wasn't that bad. Again, I had a safety net, but now I know whenever looking at things, whenever looking at opportunities or things that I want to try, I always say, what's the worst case scenario? And now I've seen it and I know that it's not that hard to recover from.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good recognition on two fronts, but I think you're wise to recognize the privileges that you had, and that if you are a middle-class person with a robust support network and parents and siblings, people who would give you a warm place to land,
yep.
The worst case is perhaps not all that terrible, but it also shows you that if you don't have those things, the line between, the person you see on the street and the line between you or I is not as bright as we might think it is. It's not as sharp as a distinction as we might otherwise imagine. And I think at this season of giving and being thankful, I think it helps us to put things in appropriate perspective.
Absolutely. And the final note on that, at our church, we volunteer with an organization called Family Promise. And it's basically providing shelter for some homeless families. And it's been very eye-opening for me on that front, because again, I was very close to being one of these families. A lot of times you get a picture in your head when you think of homelessness. We had a family who stayed with us. The son was a 4.0 student in high school who was getting a full ride to go play football at a pretty prestigious college. The mom had a great job. And, if you saw them at a coffee shop or whatever, they looked like the normal family, but they had just fallen on hard times and couldn't figure out a place to live. So it's not always, what you think of somebody living in a cardboard box. It's people really trying who their rock bottom is experiencing right now. And they're just, a couple steps away from, regaining their footing and climbing through life.
Yeah. Well, thank you for getting us off on such a personal start. I really appreciate it. So yesterday I had the privilege of interviewing a mutual friend of ours, Danny Fava, and she is like you, I think. Is it corny to say a futurist? Like a tech, it's corny, but we're going to do it.
Yep.
A tech futurist, someone who has, I think, a good vantage point of where the financial service industry is headed. I asked her for her sort of 3 top tech trends.
Mm-hmm.
And she said that her 3 were behavioral/relational software, voice, and direct indexing. So what are yours, and do you want to take issue with any of hers?
Her and I have talked about this. I am not as big a believer in voice as she is, so I'll take issue there. My biggest thing on voice is privacy on 2 fronts. So one, it feels very hackable right now, and I where her and I do agree is privacy doesn't really exist in the sense that the government's listening. Facebook and Google know more about us than anybody in the world, all of those sort of things. But if you do have things that maybe the government doesn't want access to, voice does feel very hackable, in my opinion, Alexa and those things. But on the other side, I think about if you're running a company and voice becomes big and you need to fire someone, are you going to say, hey, Alexa, remind me to fire Daniel this week, in the midst of a crowd? There's a lot of sort of sensitive things that we do still type and we keep personal that if we're in this mega voice world, I think will slow down adoption. Getting quick info and things like that, I think voice will find its place, but I still haven't seen the killer app, if you will, that makes voice really exciting to me.
Yeah, so it's an interesting exercise, dear listeners. Go back over your Google search history for the last month and see how many of those terms you would not have spoken out loud in a crowd, you weirdos. So interesting to consider. So time will tell. Time will tell who's right there. But yeah, so what are you excited about? If it's not voice, what are you excited about?
Yeah, so rather than being in conflict and not just to pump your tires, I'm sure she said the same thing. I really think anything that helps clients behave better when it comes to their money is going to be very interesting. And I think we are at the catalyst of things. I know you're working on Tulip. I think that's something that's going to be one portion of the solution, but there's so many other things that need to be built. And so that segues into, I guess, a tech trend that I would say, and I see some of this glimmers of this happening with Altruist. And so Jason Wank's new company and what he's working on, some of the larger custodians and things. It is my belief that a lot of the things that fintech focuses on today should be commoditized. We're spending a lot of time, celebrating, which this is good because advisors need it, but celebrating account opening, taking 9 minutes to 4 minutes. Like that's something that should not even be top of mind right now. Technology should completely commoditize opening accounts, moving money around, all of these. And what that should enable is people building innovation that gets you closer to the client. We focus so much on the minutia of advisors actually moving the money around between the different parties. And I just don't think that's what's important. And that's why behavior excites me, is because if we can commoditize that, if we can make that sort of table stakes, then people will start pushing up the stack and innovating around client behavior, helping clients make better decisions. I saw on Twitter the other day, Chrissy Teigen said, I don't manage my money. Like we have somebody who all of our bills, all of that stuff, like I don't get mail because all of our bills go to this person. They pay everything. They make sure our money's invested. And then like we just get an update on how we're doing. And somebody said, that's really what, how do you democratize that away from just celebrities and super rich people to average people? And I guess the final thought on that is Wealthfront is doing this. So they have this phrase they use called self-driving money. And they built this checking product. And the idea is your direct deposit will go into the checking product. They'll pay your bills. They'll invest your money in the most sensible accounts based off of what the algorithm says. And then they'll basically say, all right, you've got X dollars to spend this month on whatever you want. And I think for your average person, that's really what we want. We want to know that our future is taken care of. We want to know that we're being invested and that we're adulting properly. But ultimately, how much money am I allowed to spend on new sneakers or going out to dinner or going to a baseball game?
Yeah. No, it's perfect. So we are in the midst of massive upheaval, right? So asset managers are seeing their fees eroded at 10% per year, year over year. We saw this year commissions basically everywhere go to zero. I mean, it's hard to think of a place where there isn't massive disruption occurring in our industry, and yet behavior and advice seem to be sort of the last stronghold. Do you think that we continue to hold that line? And what do you think the future of advice looks like exactly?
So I spent a lot of time working with Aaron Klein, CEO of Riskalyze, who's a great guy and a very smart guy. And he said something once that has always stuck with me. And I think about this a lot when it comes to advice. He said, TurboTax did not put CPAs out of business. If anything, it made their businesses grow, and it gave rise to things like H&R Block. And the reason why is taxes are complicated and they're important. Right. And when something's complicated and important, you don't want to screw it up because the consequences are really bad. Yeah. Well, our wealth is the same way. So, if you mess up your taxes, the government comes after you or whatever, and there's penalties and that. But if you mess up your retirement, you're eating dog food when you're 65 years old. And so wealth is complicated and it's important. And it's unlike taxes. It's also deeply personal. And so that's why I get excited about behavior and innovation and getting closer to the client, because another mutual friend, Dennis Mosley Williams, talks about this a lot. What experience are you providing for clients? Because at the end of the day, managing their money is not really what they care about. Right. They want to know they're okay. I think advisors will be fine. And I use this analogy a lot, but I love it. I'm a huge fan of Iron Man. And when you look at that, which is a very futuristic portrayal of the world, he has Jarvis, which is, the epitome of AI. And Jarvis does a ton for him. He does a ton for Tony Stark. But at the end of the day, Tony still needs to be the one to make the decisions and to direct the AI on what to do. Whether that's building bombs or that's building, superhuman suits or anything like that, Jarvis can do a lot. But Tony has to be the one that makes the decisions and directs. And I think that's, advisors will play that role.
Yeah, fascinating. So as part of this upheaval, I've heard prominent people in the industry say that the solution is for fintechs and for advisors to provide a solution that looks a lot more like the big dogs in the tech world. Like you need to be the Uber of financial services. You need to be the Amazon or the Apple of financial services. You've said on Twitter that you think this is an unfair comparison. So why don't you think it makes sense to analogize where we need to go to the services provided by these big boys?
Mm-hmm. So I think when people say that, they're talking about user experience or user interfaces, which is hard to argue with the fact that a lot of legacy financial services companies don't have the best user experiences. However, I don't think it's the best idea for us to provide a one-click buying user experience with our portfolios. I think creating some friction there is a good behavioral idea. Right? I think it should be difficult for people to trade and swap things. I also just don't think it's an apples to apples comparison between picking a movie or a show to watch and entertaining yourself and incredibly complicated and important things like wealth management. So yes, we can try to simplify things down and make it easier for the money to flow or the sort of piping, but when you're comparing an iPhone or you're comparing Netflix or you're comparing Amazon to constructing a portfolio and managing someone's psychology and behavior, I just don't think that's apples to apples.
So you make a great point. It's one I've talked about before, that things that clients want, ostensibly, things like liquidity, transparency, ease of transacting business, ease of making a trade, these are all things that clients think that they want, and they're all very bad for behavior. All the research shows, the more you look at your portfolio, the worse you tend to behave. The more you trade, the worse you tend to do. So Meyer-Statman looked at 19 different countries and found that the more someone traded, the worse they did. And it was monotonic or like stepwise, right? So group 1 trades more than group 2, they do worse, and so on and so forth. And yet we're making that easier and cheaper all the time. Mm-hmm. Clients love it, but do they need it? And in a way, like, advice becomes even more central when we make things this easy.
Yeah, I guess my hot take would be, wealth management shouldn't be convenient. It should be, there should be consideration. There should be deliberation. It should be slow. And to equate that back to consuming, a lot of times the personal finance advice would be, if you want to buy that large purchase or something, well, rather than impulse purchasing it there, go home and sleep on it for a day and see if you still want it or something. So we advise for deliberation and consuming, but at the same token, there's this charge to make wealth management extremely convenient. And I don't know if that's really the best place we should be. So
I'm going to tweet out, wealth management shouldn't be convenient. I'm going to tag you on the tweet and give no context and just wait for Twitter to erupt. But no, I think that it is a really good point. And, we've found this as we've been designing Tulip. You're of course trying to get the simulation in Tulip down to a manageable number of minutes. You want it to be quick. You want it to be user friendly. But then there's at some point where you don't want to lose robustness, and you say, look, if you don't have 5 minutes to consider these things, for us to make decisions about how to allocate your money and about how to give you advice, like how serious are you? Mm-hmm. If you can't give 5 minutes to this. So as we begin to wrap up, I want to bring it to a bit of a personal note. You talked about your church and some of the charitable giving that your church does. There's been a real groundswell of generosity on FinTwit. There's been a great deal of, I think, social good coming out of FinTwit with Alex and Sonia's Do Better pieces and that whole movement. There's also been, a lot of giving, the taking away the layaway and things that were started by Alex and Tyrone and others. Where do you think this is coming from, first of all? And how do you think conversations around generosity and charitable giving can be better factored into the way that advisors go to market with their clients?
So I think it started, and I know he would not want to take this much credit for it, but I think it started with Tyrone Ross somewhat shifting the Overton window of our perspectives, because I think he has done a great job of saying, I understand that you all don't understand where I come from, but let me just show you what the other side of the world looks like.
Yeah.
No judgment, no bitterness. Here's just the reality. And then look, I was there, I'm now on this side, and I have an obligation to do something about it. Mm-hmm. And I think him telling his story and showing how he's been doing something about it well before he ever had any recognition, right? Well before he was ever on Twitter. And that sparked people asking questions, sometimes privately, sometimes publicly. But then I will bridge that into something I've been critical of our industry about, and something that excites me is, there's millions of people who can't get access to financial advice, right? And the nature of that is it's really hard to run a profitable advice firm, without people having a certain amount of money with the way the business models work today. However, when it comes to generosity, though, when you think about it, there's a real opportunity there, because financial advisors represent some of the wealthiest people in our country. Mm-hmm. And these people, for the most part, want to be generous. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity, one, for advisors to be generous, as we've seen. I think that's incredible with everything that's going on, and they will continue to do so, and that's spreading, right? It's like a ripple effect. But I think that there's a really big opportunity to engage their clients on this and to use their story. Hey, so in November, me and my family, we went and we did this layaway thing, and we paid off and helped kids get Christmas presents and everything. I know you're thinking about year-end giving. Like, how can we help you be generous, right? Now, one thing I've been thinking about that would be exciting is to put together some sort of organization that could effectively aggregate all of this and help, work with larger organizations. Because right now it's very grassroots, which is incredible. It's like people going and using their dollars to pay off a one-to-one thing. But I think it'd be really cool to if a client, a wealthy client, did want to do some charitable year-end giving, how do they have the most impact?
Yeah.
But yeah, so anyway, to put a bow on that, I think it's been amazing to see advisors doing this. If you're listening to this, I would encourage you to find a way to be generous. There's something to do all the time. Follow Tyrone Ross to get ideas and inspiration. But also, I would encourage you to start having conversations with your clients about planning their charitable giving around times when people most need it.
It's fascinating when you look at how money can buy happiness. There's really just a couple of ways. Right? There's really, really just a couple of ways. And, one of them is to free yourself up to do less of stuff you hate. So paying someone to clean your house or mow your yard, that is shown to buy happiness. Spending time with people you love, having vacations in particular with people you love, that buys happiness. And then the third thing, and there's only about three, is charitable giving. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that we're talking about this as much as we ought to. And, one thing that I've observed as in myself as I've watched this unfold online is that we can be a little bit uncomfortable about this, because I know as a behavioral scientist that speaking about being charitable induces other people to be charitable. And you've seen that in a big, big way, with what Tyrone started with it paying off the layaways. But then part of me is also a little bit uncomfortable personally telling the world what I'm doing, to give back, even though I know as a scientist that it works. So I think there's some level of discomfort to talk about charitable giving, but I think that we need to start doing it, because the research shows that talking about it, showing that we're doing it, it does induce others to do it. It does it does spread virally. And I think there's real power in that. And there's real power in helping our clients achieve, one of the few ways they can achieve happiness with money.
I agree. And I would say there's three things to what you just said. So number one is we're all afraid to humble brag, right? I think is, you don't want to look like, I look at how important I am because I donated to this. But at the end of the day, out of everybody who donated, not one person did I look at and go, oh, they're trying to make themselves look important.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So I agree with that. Number two, there's a lot of people I talk to who go, oh, I don't think I can make that big of an impact. I can't give that much. I want to wait until I've got more. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big believer that, if you're faithful with the little things, then you'll be faithful with the big things. And you could probably talk more about this from a psychological perspective. But if you're not in the habit of being generous now, a switch is not going to flip when you have more to all of a sudden start being generous. So be inspired by these people. If you want to be generous, start doing it now, no matter what you can give, so that you can go forward from there. And then three, I think in the times in my life, you talked about how generosity makes us happy. I've never been happier than when we have done things for people and it has truly been appreciated and that generosity has happened. I probably get more out of it than they do.
Yeah, definitely. So great advice. Be charitable. Talk to your clients about being charitable. Show the world that you're being charitable. Overcome this fear of the humble brag. Mm-hmm. And then, start with the small things. Just like everything, don't wait till you're that multimillionaire you think you need to be to make a real impact. Yep. When you put out a plea earlier this year through, I believe it was your church, you asked people on your birthday mm-hmm. to donate to this thing to provide Thanksgiving dinners for families in need. And I think it was only like $30 or $35
yep. for
a family. Many of us have $30 or $35 to spare. And I know that made a big difference for those families.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a quick clarification, wasn't for my church. It was for an organization that I partner with. I'm on the board of, called Hungry for a Day. And I'm excited to say, we fed, as a part of that, we fed over 23,000 people Thanksgiving dinner this year by people like you giving $35 for a meal. And a lot of people did that. Those small things, what seemingly small to you, $35 ended up, having really large impact.
Being a very big deal. So no session with a psychologist would be complete without the free association portion, where I throw out a term or a phrase and then you give me sort of your lightning round, top of mind thoughts on that thing. So here we go.
Yep.
Direct indexing.
Personalized ETFs for your family. Exciting, but I think right now they are the shiny object that asset management is trying to use to combat fee compression. And direct indexing will only work and take hold if the business model is radically different than most asset management products to date.
World Series champion 2020.
LA Dodgers.
Ooh.
Yeah, I think they're finally going to get one.
Wow.
Yeah.
Brutal.
I know. I'm a Phillies fan. I wish it was the Phillies, but I think the Dodgers are going to get it.
Well, I don't think it's going to be the Cardinals, but I hope it's not the Dodgers. Sorry, Aaron Klein. Underfollowed FinTwit account.
Yep. So there is a financial planner out of New York who I really like, and I think he's criminally underfollowed. I might have a bias because he spends a lot of his time working with tech employees, but his name is Samuel Dean. His Twitter handle is @Samuel S. Dean, Deane. He is writing some really killer content around equity compensation, around tech employees, and I think more people should follow him.
Okay, perfect. And I believe he has a very cool leather jacket in his avatar. Is this right? Okay,
absolutely.
This is who I'm thinking of. Very cool. So sartorial genius as well as FinTwit master. Okay, so follow him. One word to describe raising 4 small children.
Adventure.
Oh, I love it. Tech to look for in 2020.
New custodians.
Awesome. And where can people find you? If people want to follow your work, where can people find you?
Yup, I'm addicted to Twitter, and that's the place to find me, to follow what I'm writing, what I'm sharing. So you can find me there at Kyle Van Pelt.
Kyle, thank you so much for being here and for sharing this with the Standard Deviations crew.
Thanks for having me.
All opinions expressed by Dr. Daniel Crosby and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of or endorsement by the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, and its affiliates, subsidiaries, employees, and agents, including Park Avenue Securities and the Guardian Network. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for legal, tax, and investment decisions. The opinions are based upon information participants consider reliable, and Dr. Crosby and Guardian are not responsible for the consequences of any decisions or actions taken because of the information provided. Guardian copyright is a registered trademark of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America. All materials are subject to United States copyright laws. Copyright 2020 Guardian. 2020-93900, expiration 02-2022.